Hey guys, this is an introduction video on why do we play knight f6 on the move 1 against English and Reti opening. Let's take a look. So for example, when your opponent plays c4, if we were to play Slav setup, we would play c6 in this position, and assuming that white will play d4, we will just transpose to Slav. But unfortunately, this is not the case. White has the move order that will not allow black to get a Slav defense, and the move is e4. This basically almost forces black to play Caro-Kann defense, because when we play e4, white could elect to play e takes d5, c takes d5, and play d4, which will be Panov attack. There's a lot of theory here, and positions are very risky. Most of the times, black getting under attack. That's why it's called Panov attack. It's also called Panov Batvinik attack. Another variation that is possible that prevents Slav is c takes d5. And there's a lot of theory here as well. For example, queen takes d5 is not that good because knight c3. And if knight f6, white go bishop b5 check. And when we block with bishop d7, then they go bishop c4 and defend the pawn. In that case, we will be playing some kind of a gambit. And again, we do not want to allow this. If we were big fans of Caro-Kann, we would play it. c4, c6 just allows this Caro-Kann idea. Otherwise, anything with knight f3, g3 or g4, or even knight c3, we would be able to play d5, transposing to Slav type positions, except e4. Therefore, we cannot play this move. In this course, I am recommending to play knight f6 move order. What does this move order allows us to do? At this moment, we prevented white from playing e4. And if white plays in this position, for example, d4, we will play c6. And now nothing can stop us from playing d5, unless white will play this bad move d5. After which, let's say, take, and I would say black is even better here because white wasted too many moves to push this pawn, and now this is even weakness. We can play like in King's Indian style by playing g6, or we can play d6 in this position. Maybe even e6 is totally fine in this position. But believe me, no one will ever play d5 against you to just prevent you from playing d5. If they play knight c3, e3, knight f3, or g3, we always go d5 and we get to a Slav type position. The only move that is very interesting is bishop f4, which we will be covering as well. I call this a favorable Slav for white, but for this I have a good refutation in this course. The idea of bishop f4 is make us to play d5, and then they comfortably defend their pawn with e3, and their bishop happen to be in a good spot, and we don't get the chance to develop this bishop f5 because they have always moves like queen b3 at some point. Anyways, no worries, I refuted this move bishop f4, and you will see how I refute it. So we go back to c4, knight f6. What else can white do? Again, if they play g3, we play c6, bishop g2, and d5. That all transpose to Slav, or what we call actually Reti opening. This will also cover as well. And I will go a little bit deeper into this line. But let's first just understand that whatever white do, black can play c6, except this move, knight c3. This move again prevents us from playing c6, because white will play e4, and after we play d5, white can elect to play, again, variation with Panov attack by taking, and playing d4, or they can play, let's say, e5 variation, or they can play c takes d5, and then e5. None of those variations I'm a big fan, and not many grandmasters actually play this with black, because some positions are a little bit inferior, and at the best we can only equalize. Let's go back. We will not play c6. Against c4 and knight c3, we will play e5. We're basically playing reverse Sicilian, but we will be playing reverse dragon, because the only way for white here to get any decent position is by playing, for example, g3 or knight f3. We will play here d5, and after take, bishop g2, knight b6, we will get a very good position. And this is, of course, just a theoretical position, and I will teach you a lot of lines here. This lesson, which is pure English, we will divide into two parts. part 1 and part B, because those lessons are long, so I decided to divide them. So we will go over that. Of course, we will also go over lines like knight f3, knight c6, and any kind of move, e3 or d4 or d3 or a3, all those moves will be covered as well. So again, I'm repeating. After c4, knight f6, knight c3, this is the only move order where we will not play Slav setup. We are forced to play e5. If you will like this system even more, then in the very first move, you can play e5. That is totally fine, up to you. I also explained this in those lessons, that positions will just transpose to reverse dragon. It is your choice. But in order for our setup to work very nicely, we have to know Slav setup, and here's why. Imagine now your opponent plays knight f3, which is called Reti Opening. What did he do? Or what did she do? She prevented us to play e5. And we can no longer play reverse dragon, keeping in mind that the opponent wants to play here c4. So let's say if we play knight c6, and if c4, of course, we can play e5. But who would go c4 now? They would, of course, play d4, and therefore claim advantage. Let's say we would have to play d5 and bishop f4, and we don't like this position. We shouldn't play this. Let's go back. So we don't play knight c6. So what do? We go knight f6. And now your opponent, seeing you played knight f6, will play c4. He is playing Reti, and at the same time he is playing English. Most of the times, Reti and English, they transpose to each other, and there is no exact line when is it Reti and where is it English. They both could start with c4 and go to Reti, or they could start with knight f3 and go to English. That is more rare, but overall, if your opponent elect to play knight f3 and you play knight f6, after c4, you don't have a choice to play e5. In that case, you gladly play Slav setup and you're playing c6. Now from here, nothing can stop us from playing d5, and we will do that. And of course, we cover variations with knight c3, d5, and e3. Normally, everyone plays here e6 and hope to transpose to Meran after d4. But of course, if your opponent chooses to play this move order, after e6, he will not go into Meran. He will play queen c2 or b3 variation. And most likely, he will play queen c2 first. It's really up to your opponent. In any case, I made a very, very good research here, and I found that a6 is actually the best move. We're going to wait one more move, and then we're going to play e6 only if d4 played. If d4 played, perfect. We are going into our Meran, which I covered in my previous courses. The course is called Against d4 with d5. So this is, of course, good. And if they're going to play their queen c2 or b3, against each of the moves, I have a very strong continuation. In the course, you will learn how to play. So let's go back. We're not worried about that. And of course, we're also not worried about Meran d4 because we just go e6. So this will be covered. Let's go back. Let's also take a look at this move, g3. This is very, very likely to happen. People who play Reti or English, they tend to get this position. They like their pawn on c4, they like their knight on f3, and they almost always fianchetto their bishop to g2. So what do? We'll play d5, and after bishop g2, we will be playing here bishop g4. And I covered all the lines. If they just castle, or they play d4, or they play knight e5 main line, all those lines, I of course cover in our course. So no worries. This I called English or Reti, bishop g4 Slav setup, one of the main lines. Let's go back. Another important line is when your opponent plays Reti, first move knight f3, you go knight f6, and now your opponent will play here g3. He is not determining any pawns in the center, so we will play our d5, they will play bishop g2, we will put our favorite Slav setup pawn structure, let's say they will castle, and we will play bishop g4. And of course, we will cover all the lines with d3 or d4, or even now c4, of course, which is transposes. This I called Reti Opening, Slav setup with bishop g4. but it's not Reti and English. It's just Reti, where white do not go c4. They will decide with the pawn on d3, we will play knight d7, and then they will try to push this pawn with e4, either knight d2 and e4 or h3. There's a lot of lines, but very interesting variation. Of course, we cover that completely. Let's go back. And the last variation, which is called double fianchetto. So imagine your opponent played knight f3, you played knight f6, they will play c4, you will play c6, and they will play here b3. And when you play d5, they will play bishop b2. Or your opponent could play, for example, here g3, and after d5, can here play b3. It is totally up to your opponent. Most of the time people do move order with, if they see move c6, they will play, let's say, against you b3. And when you play d5, they will play bishop b2. We will develop our bishop, and they will do their double fianchetto. So the idea of double fianchetto is to control two long diagonals. And most of the time they put pawn on d3 and try to push with e4. Or sometimes they play d4. In any case, we will cover all lines against English and against Reti. Most of the time you will see that they transpose one to another. But this video is of course to explain to you why, for example, we need to know against English Slav setup, why wouldn't we just go e5? It is up to you. If you wish to just directly go it, you can do it. But if your opponent chooses to play through this move order knight f3, and let's say after you play knight f6, he chooses to play c4 then you still have to know your Slav setup. And of course you need to know Miran positions, where, for example, white goes c4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, e6, and, for example, e3. This type of transposition. But this we all have in our previous courses, which is called against d5, and you must know those as well. So this is pretty much it. There will be 7 different lessons on this. This was an introduction to explain to you why we choose this move order. I hope you really enjoy this course, and if you are, please give me your feedback. See you in the next video.